Hi there, this is a Polish Up Your Pedagogy video on planning, teaching and learning across East Lothian's numeracy frameworks. My name's Janie Henderson and I'm part of the pedagogy team. And this video was prepared by myself and my colleague Gillian Marr. Before we get started, here's how the professional learning in this video links to the GTCS standards and East Lothian's pedagogy learning sale. Planning Learning Effectively links to Standard 3.1, Curriculum and Pedagogy, and in particular 3.1.1, Planning Effectively to Meet Learners' Needs. In East Lothian, we have high expectations for teaching and learning, so the content of this video links to the expectation that learning experiences are structured appropriately to be challenging enough to stretch learners and ensure progress. The aims of this video are to recognise that links can be made across different areas of East Lothian's numeracy frameworks, and to share different models for medium and short-term planning. The teaching and learning cycle should be used as a basis for planning. As you can see in the diagram, it has 4 elements to it. Where are they? That is our learners now. Where do I want them to be? How will they get there? And how will I know when they get there? Each of these elements are critical when planning. So when we're using the frameworks to plan some new learning in numeracy, we should be considering this cycle. We should be asking ourselves these 4 questions at the beginning of the planning process, and we should be using the frameworks to plan teaching and learning, building on prior knowledge to meet the needs of all learners. When thinking about termly planning, we need to carefully consider where we should begin. Teaching from within the numeracy frameworks in order to best meet the needs of the learners. We must ensure that we're planning for our learners' next steps, so we need to think about where our learners are right now. This means that we must take into consideration the knowledge we've gained through conversations with previous teachers, during transition meetings, or any knowledge we have already through our own observations and formative assessments. It may be that during the transition meeting, the previous teacher highlighted areas within the framework that have not been taught or covered in enough depth. For example, in fractions. If this was the case, then we could start by teaching fractions in Term 1. We don't necessarily need to start with understanding numbers and numerals or place value in Term 1 because it sits on the left-hand side of the framework, unless this is the right thing for your learners. Once you've identified a starting point, you can use the diagnostic assessments, which are in the assessment folder in the Frameworks drive, to assess your learners. So, if fractions, decimals and percentages was selected as a starting point, you would administer this assessment with your learners to identify their next steps. This will then be the starting point for your planning. A video explaining how to administer the diagnostic assessments is also in the assessment folder in the Numeracy Frameworks shared drive. It's really important that we move away from teaching one area of the framework at a time. Teaching one area for a whole term or a lengthy block of time means that it might be a full year before children have the opportunity to revisit that area again. We need to ensure that we're giving learners the best chance to retain new knowledge, and this can be done by revisiting prior learning. There are some examples of what this can look like in your classroom later on in this video. So now that we've identified where to begin, it's important to look carefully at the framework to see if there are links that can be made across the different areas. In this example, a Primary 2 practitioner who's working with On Track in P2 has decided that the main focus of the learning will be on making links to doubles and halves of numbers, which sits in the grouping and sharing for multiplication and division column within the On Track in P2. We can already see on the framework that it tells us to make links to fractions when teaching this area. So when we look at the fractions page on the On Track 2 framework, we can see that the statement, I can calculate a half of an amount up to 20, links perfectly. If the practitioner has already done some teaching on small doubles, using pairwise frames, which sits in the number structures for addition and subtraction column on the framework, then links can also be made to this prior learning. So when teaching doubles and halves, we can actually bundle multiple I can statements from different areas within the framework. In this on-track and P7 example, the practitioner has identified multiplying and dividing 2 and 3-digit numbers by 10, 100 and 1000, which sits within understanding conceptual place value as the starting point for their learners. The exact same I can statement sits within the multiplication division column and explicitly mentioned that links are to be made with place value. The practitioner here has identified other I can statements within conceptual place value, multiplication division, and fractions, decimals, and percentages that can also be taught or revisited in order to give the learner depth of understanding. So when planning across a whole week, we may choose to plan for 4 numeracy lessons. These may be delivered on 4 days within the week. In this example on the screen, they're being delivered Monday through to Thursday. Here the practitioner delivers learning from understanding numbers and numerals, or place value as it's known further up the school, on a Monday and Tuesday, and then on multiplication and division on a Wednesday and Thursday. It may be that the teacher has been focusing on conceptual place value for a number of weeks but wants to continue to extend the learning, so is going to build on this learning with links to multiplication and decimals. Alternatively, the teacher may not have taught any multiplication and division, so uses the assessments to assess their learners' needs and identify next steps. This new multiplication and division learning can then be delivered on a Wednesday and Thursday. As mentioned earlier, it's about teaching more than one area of the framework within a week, so that previous learning is reinforced and revisited multiple times over a year. By focusing on 2 areas of the framework, we are revisiting and teaching new areas more frequently throughout the year. This avoids having long periods where learners are not focusing on areas like fractions, decimals and percentages, or subtraction, which are trickier and often require more time to fully understand. You can see how this model on the screen would work well for a job share. A Monday-Tuesday practitioner can focus on one area, while the Wednesday-Thursday job share focuses on a different area. Similarly, a probationer teacher who is out of class on a Monday may adapt this model and teach multiplication and division over 3 days, and the cover teacher may teach place value only on a Monday. This model is flexible and it can be adapted to meet you and your learners' needs. This model is slightly different. The same 2 areas of the framework are being taught, but in a different way. Here, the class teacher plans to teach conceptual place value as part of a whole class starter each day from Monday through to Thursday. When learners then work in groups within the lesson, the focus shifts to multiplication and division. The teacher works with each group in turn to deliver differentiated multiplication and division learning, and independent written tasks and games also linked to the planned learning in multiplication and division. And finally, in this model, understanding numbers and numerals, or place value again, is to be taught whole class during the starter or warm-up part of the lesson. Once the learners are then working in groups, the teacher is going to then focus his or her teaching on multiplication and division. But the other learners who are not part of the focused teaching group will be reinforcing this learning in their independent written task, and then revisiting prior learning to play a fraction game. This may be a game that has been taught last week or last month, but it can be used to reinforce prior learning. An end-of-lesson plenary may allow for some sharing of the learning that came from the fractions game or the written task, and this would allow you as the teacher to formatively assess learners in this area of the framework. You can see how this model covers 3 areas of the framework within different parts of the lesson. 2 areas are being directly taught, and the third area, fractions, is included to allow learners to revisit previously taught concepts. However, it may be that you want to only focus on 2 areas. You can use your own professional judgment to make decisions about which parts of the framework you teach, which you revisit, and what model meets the needs of your learners best. So you may want to now consider this challenge question from Higgies 4. Thinking about planning across the framework so that learners have opportunities to revisit and make connections with their learning, can you think about this question? How well does your planning of numeracy meet the needs of different groups of learners in your class? Thanks for listening.